Hey everybody, happy Monday and welcome to another Techstrong TV broadcast. I'm Charlene O'Hanlon. Today is Monday, April 11th, and we have an amazing lineup on today's show. I'm very excited. I just want to dive right in on it. We get things kicked off today with a conversation between Alan and Harshit Chitalia, who is the CTO and co-founder of a company called Tromzo. And they discuss how to make security easy for developers. Well, if they've got the idea that's going to change everything for DevSecOps and developers, I want to hear all about it. So this is a great conversation that Alan and Harshit have regarding implementing security, with the idea that if we really want developers to implement security, we need to make it easy for them. So that is a very, very valid point, and it is a very interesting conversation. Lots of takeaways from this one, so definitely want to check it out. After that, Alan speaks with, actually, Alan doesn't speak. We have the first of the SRE show series with our sponsor, Lightstep from ServiceNow, I think it is. And the conversation is about some insights from the recent SRECon 2022 Americas event, which happened March 14th through 16th. And it occurred bringing folks together from around the world. This is SRECon 22 Americas. So they discussed site reliability, systems engineering, the relationship between DevOps and SRE, modern observability practices, distributed tracing, eBPF, and so much more. So in this conversation, talking about some of the highlights from SRECon 22, we have Mitch Ashley and Austin Parker, who are joined by Jithin Bhaskar. And they talk, as I said, they talk about some of the main takeaways and some of the things that maybe will be popping up in conversation over the next year as it gained in popularity in this year's show. So great stuff there. After that, we have the Haunted Hacker podcast. In this one, our host, Mike Jones, is speaking with an old friend of his, Mick Douglas, who is a SANS instructor, a hacker, a pen tester, and a guy who Mike considers to be a mentor. And as per usual with the Haunted Hacker podcast, they talk about all the things. And obviously, cybersecurity is a major topic, but Mike, he likes to go down rabbit holes here and there. So it is always something of a surprise when you listen to the Haunted Hacker podcast, some of the topics that they delve into. Good stuff all the way around. I love listening to it. And this is, I believe it's part one of a two-part conversation, so we will be running part two tomorrow. After that, I'm back with the headlines, and then I have a great conversation with Donald Fisher, who is the CEO and co-founder at Tidelift, and we discuss the increased attention around open source security and whether organizations need to evaluate and significantly improve their open source management practices. Very relevant conversation, and Donald has some really great points in his conversation with me, so definitely want to check that one out as well. After that, got the webinar preview for you. And then we actually close today's show out with a Something Old segment. This is from the recent Predict 2022 virtual event. This one features Tracy Bannon, who is my co-host on Techstrong Women and is also a DevOps advocate over at MITRE Corporation, and Chris Hughes, who's the co-founder and CISO over at Acquia. And their presentation is titled Tug of War 2022, Digital Transformation and Cyber Resiliency. So they talk about the two important efforts that are in the spotlight, which are aligning business agility and technical agility and cyber resiliency as the cornerstone for all aspects of software design and delivery. So Tracy and Chris kind of go into the weeds conversationally on what that means for organizations moving forward and how it's going to impact their software delivery efforts and so much more. It's a great, great conversation between the two of them. I highly encourage you to check it out. All right, that is today's lineup on Techstrong TV. And I told you it was a great, amazing lineup today, and I don't lie. So I hope you can stick around for the whole thing. We're going to get things kicked off right after these commercial messages. All right, we are back. First up is a conversation between Alan and Harshit Chitalia, who was the CTO and co-founder of Tromzo. Tromzo is a security company, and they have a conversation about how to make security easy for developers, with the idea that if we want developers to truly implement security, we need to make it easy for them. So Harshit and Alan talk about how Tromzo is helping that effort and what we can expect on the security horizon, especially as it pertains to application security moving forward. Great stuff. Let's roll it now.
This is Digital Anarchist.
Hey everyone, welcome to another Techstrong TV interview. My guest here is Harshit Chitalia. Harshit is with a company called Tromzo, and we're going to hear all about him and the company here on this interview. Harshit, welcome to Techstrong TV. Nice to meet you.
Likewise, nice to meet you. And I've been a fan of Techstrong. We've been watching some of the videos as well and looking forward to this.
Fantastic. So I guess, we haven't had anyone from Tromzo on. It's a fairly new company, and it's your first time on. So why don't we start with maybe a little background about the company and yourself?
Yeah. So let me start with Tromzo. So Tromzo is a dev-first application management platform. And what do we mean by that, right? So our goal is to make security really simple for developers, right? So we plan to kind of make sure your entire pipeline, which is your software delivery pipeline, is simple, and we are able to kind of make sure developers have a say inside security. So for me, I have been engineering leader for several years. Right now, I'm the CTO at Tromzo. Before this, I was head of application and analytics at Juniper Networks. Right. So I used to do ship networking analytics products as well as data center analytics products. And I worked in both small companies like startups as well as big companies as well in my 10 years plus of experience.
Got it. So, I want to dive in here on this whole, because to me, this is the nitty gritty of DevSecOps. But I feel like we need to give the folks a little bit more information about Tromzo, right? So why don't, if you don't mind, maybe just a little corporate history, website.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so we've been in business for a year now. We started, I would say, right around this time last year. Coming out of COVID with all the digital acceleration happening, right, as the backdrop. And we started Tromzo, me and my co-founder Herschel, with our personal experience, right? I coming from an engineering background, him from a security background. And our goal was we were both in our journeys in our life where we thought that there has to be a better way of developers interacting with security. Right. If you look at every security vendor out there today, they pretty much are making tools for security folks. And the market has shifted where security people no longer control the software, right? It's no longer configuring firewalls, right? But it's actually making changes in code. And so now developers are the ones who need to go and fix those things. But if you are going to make your software and your tool for only security teams, developers won't be able to use it, right? So that's the fundamental gap that what Tromzo is trying to solve. And for us, the goal is to kind of start with visibility, right? If you don't know or if you don't see what you can kind of fix, you're never going to fix anything, right? So for us, it's being able to go and say that here is your CI/CD pipeline, and here are the things that need to be done with it. Right. And here is the total visibility of your AppSec program. And this is how we can incentivize you to make things better for the entire application security program. Right. So those are some of the key things that we are trying to target. Happy to go into specific use cases, but the goal here is to kind of really eliminate that friction between developers and security.
Yep. So we will dive into it in just a moment. Harshit, this is... First of all, it's music to my ears, right? I love to hear this kind of story because it's something I've been advocating for. for 7, 8 years now.
Right.
But here's, to me, the rub. Here's where it gets a little touchy. No doubt we need to make security tools for developers so they can develop secure software. But security people will not and cannot abdicate their responsibility for making sure applications are secure. It's everyone's responsibility, but the security people have to have visibility, controllability, right? They've got to have a seat at the table, obviously, and an important seat.
Exactly. Right.
And so, where rubber meets the road here very often is that these tools need to be approved by, blessed by, or even paid by security team's budget and security team folks, in order for the developers to use them. And so, and sometimes that's you get disconnects there. Security people say, this isn't secure, it doesn't give me enough visibility, it doesn't give me enough security. I'm not going to pay for this, let them pay for it. We don't have budget for that. And then, there's a million and one reasons why, right, the security team can say, well, this isn't for us. And I'm not blaming this all on security. On the other side of the coin, the developers, if they know the security people are like, I don't want to use the term forcing it on them, but if they know that this is a security team kind of project, they're like, oh no, those guys just make us do double work. We have good security tools for the developers, right? There's still that friction, much less than it was, but still that friction.
Absolutely.
Interested in your take on that.
No, I 100% agree with everything that you have said, right? And the reason for it is because we are evolving as an industry. So today, everything is microservices, everything is in the cloud. So 10 years ago, what people used to configure as security using firewalls and different mechanisms to kind of stop it at the network, everything has changed with cloud, right? Now you provision cloud formation, right? Now you provision containers. And so now what has happened is earlier AppSec used to be the small set of thing that, okay, I just do my code scanning and it's done. But now it's code scanning, dependency scanning, secret scanning, container scanning, cloud scanning. And the list goes on and on. One of the things that we found with this survey is 62% of the developers are using 11 or more application security tools in their environment today. 11. Now, if I, as a developer, come in today in the morning and on Monday morning, I see 11 people telling me something to do, I'll be like, no, thank you. I'm just going to do what my boss wants me to do. Right. So I feel like the realization even within security teams has now been that and we've been working with some of our customers here, is that there has to be a multi, I would say, step approach, right? There has to be a change in culture, right? To kind of go ahead and be okay, we are going to be a shift left organization. We're going to promote security, not as an afterthought, but from the design principle itself. So when I'm designing a new feature, security is the first thing that comes to me. And I definitely, in each of my sprints, definitely allocate certain amount of time that developers need to spend on fixing security issues. Right. So there are good companies out there, right? For example, Sneak, R2C, even GitHub, they are doing some of these things. But the problem is that there's just so much, I would say, noise, right? That developers just get tuned out of it. We have customers who have 1 million plus vulnerabilities in their environment. Now, if I went and said this to anybody outside, they would just get freaked out, right? But people on the inside know this, and the problem is not okay, when a Log4j comes in or a Spring4 shell comes in, then you're just scrambling because you don't know where all it affects, and even when it affects all the things, you are serially going to kind of go ahead and push for changes, which is never going to work, right? What you need is a security guardrail from the security team saying that these are my protected assets. These are the assets that are facing the internet. And these are the ones which are highest priority. And this is what you need to go and fix, right? Once that kind of a guardrail is what we kind of call it is established, then the engineering team can go and prioritize those things. But what's happening today is that the security team or the scanner goes out and scans everything, reports these 100,000 findings, and just dumps that whole thing onto engineering, which is like completely makes it like a no-ops kind of a thing where exactly as you established, right? Hey, this is something that security needs to go and do, right? What are they getting paid for, right? And security comes back and says that, hey, I don't even know what to fix because I don't know where these 100,000 things are. I know they are wrong, but I don't know what to do, right? So I think that needs to be solved through technology, and that's where some of the things that we are trying to solve as well. But I feel like there has to be a multi-step approach where you give like change in culture as well as make sure that security becomes like a primary thing in your day-to-day planning as well.
Agreed. I'm listening to you talking just in real life adventures with this. It is cultural, and then there is the tool aspect of it. I think the other thing that we just don't, we talk about it a little, but we don't really factor it, is the numbers. I mean, there's just not enough security people to be embedded into these security teams. So it's okay. You don't want the security team to be in at the beginning and the end, right? They come in for the handshake and to kiss the baby and go home, right? There needs to be a security presence throughout this SDLC.
Right.
But we just, and so I've heard companies say, well, you need to develop security champions on the development side of the house.
Right.
I'm not saying that's not right. That's a great thing to do. But fundamentally, can tools and culture overcome the people shortage?
So I think they have to, right? The thing is this, that we are not just going to come up with people, and especially like security people, which is like a very niche kind of, I would say, subset of the workforce, right? So we have to augment that with everything today, so that the people who know security are left to doing like high quality of work, right? Is how I would put it. So today they're spending all this time in dabbling with engineering and going back and forth or spreadsheets about like what needs to be fixed, why does it need to be fixed, and so on and so forth. All of that friction can be eliminated to the tools, whereas the security teams can just go ahead and set the right policies that the engineering can go and adhere to, right? Like, for example, one of the things that you mentioned about going and having security champions within each organization, right? So one of our customers has that in place. But the biggest problem with security champions has been for them is that they don't have the visibility across all the tools that they use, right? So security champion can be like, okay, yes, I will do something, but you have to first show me what all the tools are telling me in one single place, so that I can then go and talk to my engineering and plan it accordingly, right? So today that's like a big gap that we've seen in different places. The other problem is that people are not incentivized, right? At the end of the day, like, you need some kind of motivation, right? So developers today are incentivized if they ship more features, fix more bugs, right? Improve performance. But if I go and tell like to my manager, oh, I fixed this security vulnerability, and the question they would ask back is like, why did you even introduce this vulnerability, right? So you are in a defensive position here, which is again not the way to go about it, right? The real thing needs to be that this thing needs to be gamified, right? There needs to be like a way in which we set up team leaderboards and compare teams and make this sort of a team sport where it's not about finding fault, but actually being like, being proud that being able to solve these many security issues and what we call as stop the bleeding, right? Because like vulnerabilities are going to keep on increasing. So if you don't stop the bleeding, you're going to be at a point where it's going to be a point of no return, right? So nobody wants that. So being able to go ahead and incentivizing engineers and developers in the right way by forming some of these things along with culture, as I said, is going to be one of the key pillars through which we can transform and make this change happen.
Absolutely. I could probably sit and talk to you for hours about this, but unfortunately, we have another video we have to do next. People want to get more information about Tromso. What's the website?
So it's tromso.com, tromco.com.
Great. Hey, you know what? Come back on. We'll continue this conversation.
Absolutely. Would love to. Yeah.
All right. Tromso.com. That's Tromzo. You can see it in the logo behind Hashit. Thanks for being our guest. We're going to take a break right now on Techstrong TV. We'll be back in a moment.
SecurityBoulevard.com is the leading resource for news, analysis, and education on challenges facing the cybersecurity industry. SecurityBoulevard.com covers all aspects of cybersecurity, including data security, DevSecOps, cloud security, application security, network security, security threats, and more. SecurityBoulevard.com has the largest selection of security content, featuring breaking news, blog posts, podcasts, and more. Visit www.securityboulevard.com to learn more. SecurityBoulevard.com, home of Security Bloggers Network.
All right, we are back. Next up, we've got another episode of the SRE Show. This show is sponsored by Lightstep by ServiceNow, from ServiceNow. This is insights from SRE Con 22 Americas, the conference that occurred March 14th through 16th, which brought together engineers from around the world to discuss site reliability, systems engineering, the relationship between DevOps and SRE, modern observability practices, distributed tracing, eBPF, and so much more. So in this conversation, their hosts, Mitch Ashley and Austin Parker, are joined by Jithin Bhaskar from Lightstep to discuss some of the highlights and some of the main takeaways from the event, and as well as their experience at the conference. So interesting stuff there. It's a great conversation between the three of them. So let's go ahead and roll it now.
Hi, and welcome to another episode of the SRE Show. My name is Mitch Ashley. I'm co-host with my host, Austin Parker. And we have lively conversations about SRE, what it means, where we're at in the industry, new things that are happening, sharing experiences, and kind of exploring topics, because it's a very fast and evolving field within our area of technology. So I myself am CTO with Techstrong Group. I'm also principal with our analyst firm, Techstrong Research. So my background is both as a practitioner and also as a product creator. Over a little bit of time. We're not going to talk about how long, but that's a whole nother topic. Austin, man, how you doing? It's good to see you.
It's great to see you too. I'm doing pretty good. It's spring has sprung, and you can start to feel everyone kind of shaking off the winter and getting back out there into the world. It's really great.
I know. I'm starting to have to figure out, well, what clothes do I wear when I leave the house? Because I
know. That's funny.
How I travel
really goes to the topic of the show today.
It is.
Great segue.
Well, before we go there, let's introduce our other guest. Yes. Jithin, if you would introduce yourself.
Thank you, Mitch and Austin. Really excited to be here. I am the head of Lightstep Incident Response product. Got a privilege to be able to attend the SRE Con recently. Really excited to share some of the learnings out of it as we speak more.
Great. And I'll try to say Jathan instead of Jathan. Sorry about that. I knew I would mess that up. So Austin, yeah. So that's our topic, is kind of highlights and takeaways from SRECon 2022. I didn't get to go. I was a latecomer and I missed it. They were totally sold out. So I'm hoping to pick up a lot of great stuff from you both too. So why don't you kick us off with, was there a theme of, I mean, SRECon has evolved greatly in the last few years. And was there sort of a theme or guide us into what was happening there?
Yeah, well, just to kind of get everyone on the same page too, SRECon Americas, this was actually their first in-person event since the beginning of the pandemic. They were, I believe, supposed to have one in March of 2020 that I was supposed to go to, and then, everything happened. But it was held in San Francisco, right down by the water, across the Embarcadero, so, beautiful venue. And I would say there was about 500 total people there in person, which not huge, not the biggest in-person attendance, but it is, people are still coming out of the shell. I think there's still a lot of, understandable anxiety about COVID, certainly from a corporate standpoint, with people's travel and, sending people off around the world to go listen or talk. That said, it's actually really interesting because what's the middle part of SRE, right? We're talking about site reliability engineering, but there's been some people that say, like, oh, it's resiliency, right? There's the R in SRE is for resiliency. And I think that's what you can really pluck out of this event, is the amount of resiliency it takes to run something like it. The amount of precautions for health and safety, the amount of, logistics that have to happen to get everyone there. And I think that theme of resiliency really went through all the talks that I had a chance to see. And just in terms of like conversations, that's what I really got out of it, is that this is beyond, the actual discipline of SRE and beyond kind of the keeping things up and running and understanding what's going on with your system. This is a very resilient community that was really just hankering to get back out there in the world and see each other and share what they've learned over the past couple of years, especially given how unprecedented everything was with the coronavirus pandemic.
But then, how about you? Jump right in. Well, this is we don't call on each other. We just, we talk, give each other space, and then we talk.
Talk over me.
I'm learning that. So that's great. Yeah, I think just adding on to what Austin is saying, even though it was just 500, not as large as some of the, past SRE conferences were, but the amount of conversation I had with so much of relevancy into the topics, what we were really looking to learn for, was super impressive. Example, a conference I went to prior to this was AWS reInvent, and you had a lot of people, right? But it was difficult to get, real attention into the real topics of what just Austin said about resiliency, reliability. How do you continue to mature your practice, your organizational structures, and in general, how do we come together and learn from each other? It was great, even though the number was 500. But the relevancy of the conversation was immensely helpful and impressive as well.
Yeah, reInvent was another like mass people, even though it wasn't as big as past events. I'm curious about, you could talk about resiliency, both as applications and making our infrastructure and applications more resilient. And we could talk, and it's also something that's evolved in the SRE community as kind of bubbling up, maybe even above reliability. Do you think it's because of the applications kind of thinking about how to be more resilient, or are we thinking about resiliency as it's a site or system reliability thing that we need to focus on, or are they one and the same?
It's a really good question. I think one thing that kind of came through in a lot of the talks, there's a couple of really ones I want to call out. And if you're listening to this, you can go to the SRECon America's website, and a lot of these have slides up that you can kind of go and work your way through. But there was a talk by Courtney Nash, who is from an organization called Verica, and they she presented on something they have called the Void, which is the Verica Open Incident Database. And it's a big publicly searchable database of software incidents, for big public systems. What I think is interesting is, one thing, and maybe this is something that's kind of come out of the last, certainly 2-3 years, but really more than that, is this idea that we need to be, it's very easy to get caught up in talking about success, but you don't necessarily learn from success, you learn from failure. And the more that we as a community of practitioners and as a community of people that really care deeply about system reliability and about system resiliency, the thing we can do to actually get better is be more open about what went wrong. And I think that's what's interesting about the Void, right? Is that it's really normalizing the idea of like, oh, let's take all this stuff and let's actually, put it out there into the world, right? And learn from it rather than kind of keeping it under our hat, so to speak. That's something that's been missing, I feel like, especially, that was one of the things that I feel was really missing, kind of the weird, everyone's online, virtual situation of the past couple of years, is people don't feel comfortable talking about failure online. They don't feel comfortable, like, necessarily writing it out in a Slack with a bunch of other people. They don't publish it out to the world. But if you get people and kind of, get them in close and have a conversation, then they're much more comfortable talking about it, sitting around over a lunch table. So this idea that we can, I think this is actually maybe a failure of resiliency, is that we've figured out, like, we need to share, what went wrong, and we need to share that more widely so that everyone else can learn from it, and we need to publish this sort of thing. But we haven't really figured out, like, how to get comfortable doing that in a virtual space. And you really noticed it by the difference between, like, the conversations that we would have at a in-person event like this and in a virtual one before.
Yeah, that is such a great, I would say, insight, Austin, you just shared. I got an opportunity to ask charity majors a question during one of our, happy hour event kind of a show. I asked her, what is that one thing which she would like to see in an incident response kind of a product? She thought about it for, I would say, for a bit, and responded saying that a system which can be the repository of all the tribal knowledge and information of the people within the company who've gone through some of these incidents and issues in the past. And here is an interesting fact. I started my career 20 years back as an on-call engineer or a systems engineer. Every time I got into an alert or an issue, we used to carry those good old world pagers. It is nerve-wracking because I don't know what's coming, really. The first thing I really need is I need to really understand what exactly is the problem. I'm talking about 20 years back, where you don't have this extensive amount of observability systems like Lightsteps of the world, which can give you real insights into what's going on from an observability point of view. But the first thing I need to know is what's really going on, what system is actually broke, what service is gone, which rack is actually gone toppled down. And the next thing I need to know is whom I need to tap into from the actual owner of that system or the server. It's the same problem even today, after 20 years back. The challenge is, as and when the systems grew, as and when the ecosystem of application which help you manage some of these issues and the incidents, it's become so vast where you have a lot of pockets of tribal knowledge which exist within the company. And that's what got me passionate about how do we build this in a different way. Exact reason why we actually wanted to build something like an incident response and redefine how we look at it. Answer from Charity Major was a big inspiration for me in terms of it's not just about bringing the systems, but it's also about bringing the people and the knowledge together and how do we make it in a seamless way.
I think that's the focus on people is really important, because I think one of the other things I saw a lot in the talks was this focus on, socio-technical systems, right? And bringing people in. There was a really, in Courtney's talk, to kind of keep going on that for a minute, there was a really interesting analysis because they, having all this public information means they can do meta-analysis of the information. And one of the things that the data saw that kind of intuitively, I think we all get in this trap of thinking like, well, if an incident is really long, right, then it's really bad. That there's some sort of there's an association between length of a failure or fault and impact.
Almost but outage mentality, right?
Right. This sort of very error focused, safety one kind of mindset. But in doing these longer analysis, they actually found that isn't always the case, right? Like actual customer impact has a lot more to do with sort of what specifically is going on in your system and what it's in relation to, right? So it's less that I had an incident and it's more like why I had an incident, right? So this focus, kind of the point that led to is focusing on duration, focusing on mean time to resolution, things like that were actually not the best way to orient your thinking around incidents, because you optimize for what you measure, right? So if you're measuring MTTR, if you're measuring like, handle time or how long something goes on, then that has this maybe even invisible impact on what you measure, how you're measuring it, what you're dashboarding, what you're not dashboarding, right? And the processes and the team that you're building to resolve those incidents or respond to those incidents are also built around this idea. But it's not always the right way to do it. And I don't want to like overgeneralize, because I do think that there's, there are people tend to hear like, oh, don't focus on MTTR, don't focus on duration. There is no root cause, whatever. Like that's true, but it's also like not necessarily true, right? Like you need to kind of hold both these ideas in your head and figure out where is it actually true and why is it actually true in those circumstances, and where is it something that should be abstracted over like a much larger thing? Because that's one of the things that gets lost in this, that I think I saw, in several other, like, talking to people from Google, right? They have completely different concepts of what a system is than you or I, maybe, right? If your job is to make sure that Google search is available, then your priorities aren't like on a different planet. They're in a different universe than mine. Depending on the size of like my user base or application. If your job is Amazon shopping carts, right? Like the actual business outcomes of failure are so much different for people in these two seats that it's hard to actually do kind of an apples to apples, like what works for you, what can work for me comparison. So I think this is one thing that I saw in conversation a lot, is that we don't have that. We haven't figured out how to really address that breadth of tooling and experience and the way we talk about things. It's very much still people coming down from on high that have their big giant ginormous complex systems and saying, well, this is how we do it, and then someone that has a fractionally smaller set of problems saying like, oh, I should do all that, but there's a lot of other stuff they should probably be doing first.
It strikes me as well, one, we have a lot of unlearning to do. I mean, how uptime and 5 9s and all of that is a very sort of quality metrics focused, error metrics focused. And I think what you're highlighting is that systems aren't big monoliths anymore. They're not, just service-oriented architecture broken up into pieces. They are, tiny dots on Rubik's cubes that are being reassembled all the time in different ways. And so it's a much different environment to do this in. And it seems to me we still have a lot of work just to understand how to do things in a resilient way, whether it's in an operationally resilient or software resilient way, because it isn't up or down, right? It may be there are some things happening within Google search that we need to take care of, but Google search is still working in some form or another all over the world, or most of the world, right? Or our application, our financial application, it isn't up or down, right? So it's a different mindset. I mean, how does the SRE community help evolve that thinking? I know it's kind of a big question, but it seems like we've got to sort of change our thinking to change the problem, if you will.
It's tough. I mean, I think that some of it is this is a really good segue, actually, because there was a talk from someone at Google who, if you're familiar with DORA, the DevOps research thing, so they went and took that and they started applying it to SRE to see kind of like what's the same, what's different. And I think the most interesting takeaway I saw is, I'm going to actually quote here because it is pretty insightful. If you actually look at sort of these core principles, then a lot of people are already widely practicing SRE. They just don't call it that necessarily, right? Like a lot of the things that we do, because there's just such a high overlap between DevOps and SRE. And what's happened is DevOps has kind of moved left in terms of, originally it was sort of maybe in the middle of the software development lifecycle, and now, shift left, DevOps is becoming more all-encompassing, so SRE actually kind of takes those initial, the stuff that was DevOps before DevOps became everything, and says, oh, this is actually what we care about. Things like agility, right? Things like shipping code to production quickly. Things like getting fast feedback loops. Things like, accountability and really good, retrospective practices and stuff like that, right? The things that DevOps was originally about, like SRE is kind of carrying those forward. Those responsibilities have moved in some way.
Interesting. Is that a theme you picked up also, Jithan?
Yeah, quite often. I think it's interesting that we are maturing into more of a resiliency conversation versus reliability, which is very important from systems and point of view. But I think Austin wrote a really nice blog article recently which talked about it's inevitable that things will break. And as things break, how do we make sure that not just the systems are resilient, but also people are resilient to be able to take action on it? So one interesting aspect I also noticed, and maybe because of the after effects of the pandemic and how people have really been at home, work from home, and how burned out they are. But I also sense this need to recognize the people aspect, which is attached with the resilient systems. And interestingly, one of the mission statement we have for ourselves is how do we build resilient systems and happy teams, right? And to make it really real in terms of what I'm talking about, it's about how do we also look at things like as and when you have the things will break, which is inevitable. As and when things break, you may have teams on call for an extended amount of period or time or days. And how do we bring in some of the data forward as a part of getting more visibility into how teams are really working? Because talent is one of the precious things we have across the companies. And take an example of Google. I was talking to someone from Google recently. They've introduced a new system of incentivizing people who are actually on call above and beyond their normal hours and the jobs which they do, right? Which I believe I see a transformation happening in the industry where everybody spoke about 5 nines and 4 nines and 3 nines. Now, how do we also look at the people element attached to it, which is another fundamental thing I've heard quite a bit as and when in different conversations with the people around, as and when I spoke to them. And another insight I also gathered, one of the most high demand features, which I've heard often from the people, apart from everything like on-call, monitoring, observability, integration with common tools like Slack and MS Teams and all of it. But I also heard a lot about postmortem as a concept, right? How do we make sure that, as and when there is an incident, they have the ability to go back and take a look at some of the historical patterns of the incident which happened, and how can then we learn out of it? Or there is a systematic way for people to really capture insights and make it available for the rest of the organization so that they are paying forward as a SME or to the people who may come after them or who are now going to be on call. It could be the next month, it could be the next day, or it could be the next hour. right? And I see that evolution really happening, the importance of postmortem, and one of the most asked feature in terms of a product per se. So what I want to close it off by saying is that I see the evolution of moving from 5.9 reliability or a 4.9 reliability to talk a lot about resiliency, not just about from a system point of view, but even from a people who are really running the show at the background.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think so many parts of our broader industry are kind of in this same place. I'm going to be speaking at a digital executive event in a couple of weeks. And part of what that talk is about is in the security world, it's not about just about preventing attacks and preventing bad things from happening. It's equally, maybe even more so about it's going to happen. It happens to everybody. I mean, that's the world we live in, whether it's you personally or you as a major corporation. It's about how you respond to it, right? You need to be prepared. You need to practice it. It's the red team, all that kind of thing. Same thing is happening. We're talking about resiliency in both the architecture and in SRE and in our operational roles, if that's even a division as clear as it used to be. I'm curious about too. There were some really good sessions. There was a variety of sessions, so definitely please check out usenix.org for the session content. There was a session about mentoring the next generation of SREs. Like this isn't new. We've been doing this a while. We're calling it SRE now. There was also some sessions on sort of what are the metrics, whether they're performance metrics or observability kind of information. Were there any interesting conversations happening with like how are we helping the next generation of people come up and bring what they can bring to this conversation? And how do we let the rest of the organization know through metrics how we're doing, what's going on?
Yeah, I think there was a lot of really good conversations about, I think I've said this recently, SRE is kind of I think it still gets treated as new in a lot of ways, or as the new shiny toy, but really we're talking about practices that have been used in production at really large places for decades now. And while there's a lot more formality and kind of professionalization, I would guess, of SRE as like a title, it's going through the same loop that DevOps did in a lot of ways, where it starts out as this cultural movement and then turns into something you can buy a credential for. One thing that I think is really interesting is that for as much as we do talk about, SRE and DevOps, and we talk about this sort of broadening, how do we get people into the SRE industry or whatever, ops is still ops. Like we haven't actually, as much as we'd like to think otherwise, like ops is still there. They still exist. There are still, I might be able to go into, EC2 or AWS and pull up a, new VM, or, not care about the database behind whatever managed SQL I'm using. But like there's a server there still somewhere, right? Like there's still actual, someone tweeted this out yesterday. I thought it's great. This, you wouldn't see this if it hadn't been converted to light and then bounced off of mirrors over thousands and thousands of miles, right? Like the physical aspects of like operations and actually building servers and data centers and all that sort of stuff is still out there. It still exists. I'm wondering if the actual next generation of SRE isn't a little bit closer to that ops idea. Or maybe we see a split, right? There's people talking about platform engineering as kind of like the next wave of SRE. Maybe you have platforms and then operations engineering. I don't know. Maybe the question behind the question is like, you're talking about how do we mentor the next generation of SREs? Like, should there be a next generation of SREs, or are we already to the point where the next thing should be platform engineers or operations engineers or some subspecialty that we haven't really defined yet?
Yeah, we touched on that on our roundtable that we had just a few weeks back.
Yeah, I mean, so something I want to share about this whole SRE as a practice, right? Where, as when we are speaking to a lot of our customers, what the great thing the SRE as a concept did is there is that awareness of how do we make this practice embraceable, irrespective of the size of the company, what you are. Like some of the customers we speak to, like a smaller early growth or, that I would say post-revenue kind of a startup, which we are working with, they all want to embrace the culture of SRE, but what is embracing that culture, what's helping them now do is they are having the dev teams really own SRE as a culture, but even though they may not have SRE as a title at the moment, or there's no named person as an SRE within the team, but that practice of as SRE, every dev now build and also owns it and maintains the application too, which is what the great thing, the SRE as the whole, the Google Book of SRE, everything we, talk to the customers, sometimes some of them cannot afford to have a team of SRE of their own, but that concept and a practice, I see a lot of these companies are embracing. Like you build it, you maintain it, you own it, right? From an overall, I would say, a dev practice point of view. I don't know what to call it, whether it's a DevOps practice or an SRE practice taking on a bigger form as a culture, or it's a platform engineering, whatever we want to call it. But we see that wave really happening as we speak to a lot of customers of ours in the market.
I wonder also if there's actually going to be a split between, maybe not a split, but as kind of people get, I think that's a lot of this gets tied up in like the Great Resignation, right? And this idea that kind of post-pandemic, there's been a wave of labor liquidity, shall we say, and people, changing jobs and people like kind of redefining what work is. I mean, personally, I know a lot of colleagues that like just left the industry, right? They said life's too short to like be touching computers all day. And so they went off to become alpaca farmers or something, which is a luxury that not everyone gets. I understand that. But it's actually kind of curious when you think about it, though, because we do, like, if you think about an office, or you think about an organization, like there's people whose dedicated jobs are just like culture, right? They figure out, processes, they figure out, how do we reward people? How do we, incentivize or disincentivize things? Like even outside of just management or managers, like there are people whose job it is to do this. So maybe that's like an idea whose time has come, sort of SRE or DevOps, but really just focusing on the cultural side of it and focusing on the, communication practices and focusing on the processes, that isn't explicitly like a management role, because this is maybe a little broad, or this is maybe even a topic all of itself. Like, are engineering managers really the people that should run SRE teams? I don't know. I think that we tend to look to management in engineering organizations as the ones that kind of help reinforce and set culture, but I think managers are almost always kind of compromised individuals in that, because of the way reporting works and because of how, how SRE works, right? Like SRE, DevOps, all these things weren't top-down initiatives; they were bottom-up. It was people in the trenches saying, like, we have a better way of doing things, and we want to do it this way. Can you really replicate that by, kind of this grassroots approach? Most of the time, I think you need buy-in, you need leadership to come by and say, like, yes, we support SRE, right? Or we want to do DevOps, or we want to do whatever. And without that buy-in, you can't get anywhere. But it's always hard for them to be ones that like drive culture in a way that is really responsive to what the employees, to what the people building the stuff are feeling. If that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, it does. And I think we will constantly be struggling to overcome things like really hardened silos in organizations. And I think even the phrase developers eating or software eating the world kind of puts that lens on developers. Mm-hmm. What's really happened, I think, is so many disciplines have all been elevated, whether it's ops and SRE, whether it's security, data, compliance, AI and ML, et cetera. A lot of people have come to the table because they see a way they can play differently in a sort of DevOps agile structure. Now, culturally, there may be a lot of obstacles to get over, with either some of the history or just the organic culture with an organization. But I feel like we're redefining all of this as we go. Because what DevOps isn't what it was 5 years ago, and what SRE is today isn't going to be what it is 5 years from now.
Yeah, and it's
fun.
Yeah, it's going to be difficult as an SRE to purely rely on human capability and intelligence to really maintain the resiliency and the reliability. And that's what I think you will see a lot of products and systems in the market, which will come with certain amount of augmentation by AI/ML capability. It could be all the way starting from simply, one thing we hear often when we speak to SREs are the amount of noise sometimes alerts create within the system. And how do you make sure you have an intelligent system which helps them correlate some of those alerts so that it's not noise and you then miss the real alerts, which you need to now take a look. But my basic point is that it's going to be difficult just with the tribal knowledge what we have and the human capability what we have, but it need to be continuously augmented with some of the AI/ML capabilities, which I think every one of us need to invest into in terms of how do we augment some of these roles, irrespective whether it's an SRE. Most of the engineers or the developers are on call nowadays, which is a great practice, I believe.
Yeah, but I also think that there's kind of even yes, we need the systems to help us understand our systems because our systems are too complex, but I think there's also just a lot of foundational stuff that we miss sometimes. One thing that kind of as an aside, you go talk to people about metrics, right? Not even business metrics, but just machine and system metrics. People it's statistics, right? It's hard. It's not something that is really super intuitive, and so you'll see people multiply a percentile by a count, right? You can't do that. It doesn't make sense. But the systems, the actual underlying visualization or plotting or querying engine, it doesn't care. It's just well, okay, you want to multiply these two numbers together. Cool. Here's the result. And I think that's what you see in a lot of incident response and a lot of observability and a lot of SRE stuff in general is there's a big, I don't want to say skills gap because that's not really what I'm getting at, but it's more like an understanding gap where we don't, I think it's very in vogue to say oh, you don't, and I think I said this earlier, you don't need it because you're not Google, which is true. But the reason that we do stuff like that is because we don't know necessarily the right way to do things. Everything is so opaque. There's not a lot of great pure learning resources that say well, here's what all this stuff actually means and here's how to actually do the math. We have to copy the people that are bigger than us because we assume they know what they're doing, because if they didn't know what they're doing, would they be able to keep Google search running? Right? So it's this tautology of we can't really push forward because the level of complexity, we don't trust the systems we have to actually be accurate or to tell us what they need to know because we don't trust the AI or ML or whatever. We don't necessarily trust ourselves because we don't have a high level of confidence in doing all of the really hard work that needs to be done because we don't have maybe the background for it, or it was stuff that we didn't build in the first place, right? Maybe this number, it looks like it should be a count, but it's actually a percentile, and I don't know that because I didn't implement it in the first place, which gets back to the whole point about tribal knowledge, right? I don't think we're going to solve this problem on this show, but that kind of explosive exponential complexity that is really on the back of human beings is that's, if someone figures this out, or that's someone helps figure out how to solve this, I think that's really going to transform how we talk about whatever the next generation of SRE is.
Some great insights, Austin. Jathin, we have a few minutes left, and congratulations on the launch, by the way, of Lightstep's incident response. We have another segment coming up in our schedule. We're planning not to talk about the as a product only, but talk about incident response in the context of SRE. I'm curious if you could take a few minutes. We've talked a lot about how much things are changing in the land of SRE, what it is today, where it's going. How do you create? I mean, this is sort of a new category too, thinking about incident response in the context of observability. How do you create a product like the one you've launched, in knowing that the whole what you're building is something not only it's going to evolve, but everybody's going to evolve, maybe to a different place than where we are right now?
Yeah, great question, Mitch. So if you look at a lot of tools in the market, in the incident response space, a lot of it is actually built around on-call teams as a concept, which we believe it's slightly archaic in terms of how you think. But the way we conceptualize our product is all around the service reliability. How do you drive ownership of the services? How do you drive the reliability of the services? And that's how our product is all built around. It's all about how you manage, maintain the health of the services fundamentally, right? The second aspect of it is, the way we ideated our platform is there are certain jobs to be done for an SRE, primarily, or the on-call teams, which are primarily responsible for application services systems, right? How do we deliver that all-in-one platform, which can help them do the job so they don't have to swivel chair, like all the way from on-call to intelligent alert grouping to postmortems to, I would say, you can think about all the key components which need to come together. Like example, how do we make it super easy for them to integrate in the ecosystem of tools which they have? Example with integrating with some of the top monitoring tools which we have in the market. And how do we make it super easy for them to be able to kind of bring all that together and have that single screen view about incidents and alert? On an average, every customer we speak to, they have at least 4 to 5 different places which they get alerted into. Now, they are doing whack-a-mole at the moment, right? Some companies we spoke to, they get 30,000 alerts in a month. How do you expect that team of 50 to figure out what alert is more important? And that's where we believe this evolution, one is you need to think through the construct of the service and the health. The second one, you need to augment all the systems with immense amount of intelligence from AI/ML capabilities. And that's where we have embraced a lot of our capabilities from ServiceNow. That's where our product is built on from a platform point of view. We have embraced a lot of those capabilities from ML point of view to be able to embed into the product so that it's a much more intelligent system. Not just from making sure you get the right alerts, but also be able to then capture what went wrong. How do you now preserve that knowledge within the system through things like a postmortem in future? So I would say we have thought through the system in a very, very different way versus a classic on-call based incident response model. Austin, would you add something more to it?
We have a few minutes left. So yeah, dive into this more.
Yeah, I think it's honestly, I think the best way to kind of see it is to go up and sign up for it and try it out yourself. I do think it does some really interesting stuff. And there's a ton of potential, right? Like really and this isn't just potential, on the incident response side, right? Like, 'cause when you get down to it, there's nothing, one of the challenges I think that a lot of other people in the market have right now is that they are siloed, right? That you have, 20 different tools to generate alerts, or you have 40 different data sources, and you're trying to kind of, someone's saying, I got to make a new service, right? I'm going to deploy a new service. Well, what do I have to do? It's like, oh, well, you need to send stuff over here and then over here and over here and over here. And it looks like, if you've ever roasted like a, you put something in a smoker and you're sticking all these probes in it, right? Now imagine that you had to do that to check the temperature, and then you have to put another one in, and and then you have to do that 14 more times, and so you've got this, pork butt looks like a porcupine because you have all these different probes and sensors and everything, so that all these different teams can monitor it. What if you just had one thing, right? If you had one place that we were sending kind of all the observability data to that was able to do alerts. It was able to kind of generate incidents and keep track of on call and do all this kind of high level stuff. I think that's kind of where the future, that's where not just Lightstep Incident Response, but Lightstep as like kind of a company, like what we're going towards. Because you don't have any of these higher order things in SRE. You don't have chaos engineering. You don't have incident response. You don't have postmortems. You don't have run books. You don't all that stuff. That all requires data. You need massive quantities of it, and it needs to be very high quality. And once you have that sort of foundational observability into your system and into your processes, then you're able to start building on top of that. And that is where kind of we're going. It's a journey. We're not there 100% yet, but it's super exciting stuff. If any of this sounds interesting, you should check it out. You should
definitely check it out. Go to the Lightstep site and find out more. Free account. I always think the best way is to go use it, right?
Yeah, definitely.
So good way. Well, thank you both. It's been a great conversation, and hopefully we've shared some things from SRECon 2022 helpful, and some additional thoughts beyond that. Look forward to people joining us on our next episode. I want to thank the team at Lightstep for sponsoring the SRE show, and my co-host Austin, and of course our guest today, Jithin. Look forward to talking with you both again soon. Take care. Thanks everybody for joining us today.
Thank you, Mitch.
Hey, everyone.
ContainerJournal.com is the leading online destination for centralized computing-related content. ContainerJournal.com covers all aspects of software containers, from container management, data management for containers, container security, networking for containers, to the entire container ecosystem, Kubernetes, microservices, serverless, and more. ContainerJournal.com has the largest selection of container-related news, featuring breaking news, blog posts, podcasts, and more. Visit www.containerjournal.com to learn more.
All right, we are back. Next up, we've got the Haunted Hacker podcast. In this one, host Mike Jones speaks with Mick Douglas, who he considers to be a very old friend of his. He's also a SANS instructor, a hacker, a pen tester, and also a mentor to Mike. They talk about all things cybersecurity related, and as per usual with the Haunted Hacker podcast, they certainly go off topic a bit, but certainly a fascinating conversation between the two of them, as always. This is part one of a two-part conversation. Let's go ahead and roll it now.
So yeah, like the conference scene, I feel like it's really changed, right? So before I left for London, I had gone to DEF CON, years back, and it was a certain way. That was back when it was still at, I want to say Rio.
You would have been, or was that Riviera, actually?
Riviera. Yeah, it was at Riviera. That's where when I went with Josh and all that. But yeah, like going from that conference to being in Europe for a couple of years and coming back, and just, it seems like the scene has changed. And I don't know if it's always been this way and I just haven't been tapped into it. But like, I look on Twitter and it's almost like, and I really hate Twitter with a passion. I really hate it. But it's like people try to find reasons to flame, or they try to ignite some kind of, war wagon or something. And I don't understand that. I've never really understood it, but I don't know if I was not tapped into it and I am now, or what it was, but it's something new to me.
No. I'm gonna bring it back old school.
Okay.
Was Usenet civil?
Oh, good point. Yeah.
Right? Like, was IRC civil? Right?
Never.
We were there. It was every bit the shit show.
True.
It's like people are jerks. Film at 11. I do think that the thing that's a little slightly different, though, is Twitter, because it's so brief, unlike like a Usenet posting where you could be a little more nuanced. With Twitter, it's like you can just like lob a hand grenade, and you kind of almost have to weaponize it to get that engagement. Whereas with like the Usenet postings, like some people like wrote like massive theses.
Yeah.
So
yeah, you're right. IRC was a shit show.
Yeah, but the saving grace is unless somebody like copy pasted it, like it would just scroll off and you wouldn't hear from it again. And so like, but yeah, no, people were always jerks. I think that I do think though that there is a contingency of folks that have figured out that like by kind of curating outrage and like keeping that going, that they can kind of be somebody as a leader of a type. And, you know, they kind of are. It's just they're leading an angry mob. And so, you know, more power to them, I guess. But
at the same
that's
time,
not a scene.
Like social media now has, with all of the algorithms and everything, I mean, like it seems like we're all just talking to a mad vacuum, right? Like every once in a while, because we've all been talking about the certifications and we've been talking about this forever, it seems, you know, and maybe there's been some kind of change in a little bit, but overall, like, I think the problem I have right now is like Twitter, I see the same people, LinkedIn, I see the same people. I have to go and physically go like, and then those people pop up more. Well, I mean, I want to see them, but I want to see everyone else. So, I mean, like that angry, it seems like you almost have to do that, like angry, like mob mentality. You've got to get people mad or super excited or something drastic has to happen for the algorithm to go, okay, we're going to take this a little further out, you know, and kind of like brand it out. So how do you feel about that? Like versus IRC back in the day? Like, I mean, yeah, things did happen. Do you think it's more productive or have we lost the productivity of what ML is trying to do with us with social media? I know there's a huge like trend of trying to fix those issues of like, how do we ethically and, you know, responsibly make sure kids aren't going to go kill themselves because they saw too many of XYZ or somebody said
Tide Pods.
Yeah, or eat Tide Pods, right?
Well, so I think that there's, and I'd be lying if I said I didn't think a lot about this. Like, this is something that really kind of low-key terrifies me. I think that in some ways, the algorithms actually work for good in some use cases. So, like, like-minded people, like, find, like, a support group and, like, hey, here's, like, I'm dealing with this thing. And, like, there's, I've noticed that since I've kind of been tweeting a little bit more about, like, incident response and kind of forensic-y things, that I'm getting more of that in my feed. And that's been like actually really helpful for me. But I know firsthand from friends, one of my friends, his daughter recently graduated from college, and she like on a different platform, like started talking about like some body image type stuff. And all of a sudden she gets this like, hey, yeah, you are too fat. You need to just like have a stick of gum for dinner. And because the way the algorithms work, right, that's what you start getting, and you get more of that. And like whatever you focus on, like in life, you kind of manifest more of that. And I know that sounds super hippy dippy, but I really do believe that. And on social media, it's like, boom, way elevated. And those algorithms are like hyper efficient. And so like if you're doing like good and healthy kind of social media, you're probably going to be getting some good and healthy stuff. If you're not though, man, you're on a trail of woe with like greased skids. And so like, I couldn't agree more, Kim. I really couldn't.
Yeah, it's also kind of scary because at the same time, you don't want to have an algorithm that only gives you what you want to hear, because that creates this. That's how we get so divided. That's partially what's happened here in the United States and across the world, is because we've been so divided because we only hear what everybody wants. Well, whatever we want to hear overall. We don't. And like sometimes people, you know, it's good to have constructive criticism. And that's how ML hasn't figured out what constructive criticism is. If I'm gained some weight and, you know, hey, my friend, hey, you've gained a little bit of weight, you know, like whatever, like, have you done something different? Is there something going on? That's different than saying, hey, you're fat, eat a carrot, you're sick, and then having like 200 people you don't know, like, do the same thing. Absolutely. So yeah, it's pretty frightening to see like kind of how this is going to kind of play out. But it's kind of disheartening. I don't want to keep talking into a vacuum. If I wanted to talk to a vacuum.
But that's where our facts come from. Like, if I have a question about the world, I go to the facts, which is social media, right? Like,
right.
It's legit news in some part of the world.
Man, people just, that takes a lot, like, people don't like take 5 different sources. They take their one source of, and
this time. Who's got time though? That's the thing that, like, I would love, like, so I'm going to try not to violate any NDAs here, but like, Mike has had career gigs where he's like spending that time and getting all that alternate like news feeds, synthesizing it, packaging it up, analyzing it, and giving a portfolio of curated news that an organization cares about. The reason that like an organization does that because they care and they have the money to do it. Right. I don't know what, like, I don't know how we could do it. Like, it sounds super undemocratic, but like, it would be hella cool if there were some way to have like an actual peer reviewed, true neutral news source. And they're just like, yo, like, both sides in the middle, eat it. This is the facts.
Right.
Here you go. But like, like, nobody would advertise on that. Like, it would have to somehow be funded. Like, I don't know how to do that.
PBS.
Peer reviewed.
You got ideas?
Well, what is your thought process on the whole Web3? So I'm kind of delving into the new Web3 like realm, kind of checking it out. It actually gives me a lot of hope. Like, people are really kind of going, nobody knows what they're doing. They're just we're just going to end up in the same mess. And possibly, but here's the thing. Yes, of course, they had to you have to build something and then break it, because that's what hackers do, and that's how you find problems. But at least this time around, it seems to me, at least from what I've seen, people are actually trying to go, okay, we did this, and we see that there is an issue with the security. Before we get way too out of hand and have these legacy systems we can't fix, how do we do this? And obviously, we're still years away from truly being at a good Web3. I went to East Denver here back in February, and it was kind of insightful that, like, little things that I brought up, they're like, oh, I'm like, well, it's great that it's all peer reviewed, but how do you handle insider risk? Because if everybody's getting paid not getting paid, or getting paid, like, somebody's got to get compensated for doing all this peer review, right? So at what point, like, and they're like, like, yeah, that's something really big. I'm more worried about your insider risk messing with that than anything else, because somebody's going to get upset that somebody made more or didn't make more, and they feel like unjust, right? But what are your thoughts on like the future of Web3 and where it's going and stuff?
I'll tell you what, one place that has insider risk down to a T was Bank of America. That place, insider risk, like, that was an art form. They had that shit down to an art form.
I will tell you that their fraud prevention is terrible.
Well, every bank's fraud prevention is terrible.
Well, so I can't speak specifically to their fraud prevention now, but back in the day when I worked with them, their fraud prevention actually was pretty baller, because what they were doing is they said that, like, hey, here's the acceptable fraud ceiling we're going to tolerate. We're going to try to tamp it down always. But, they realized that there's a certain amount of fraud that's just going to happen. And when it like went above and it became too much, they would just drop the big elbow on it and do like much, because the problem is, if the things that you have to do to be anti-fraud in many cases are also anti-convenience. And at a certain point, you're pushing away consumers or, organizations that are using your service. And that, like, right, like, I can make a very, very secure bank that nobody will want to bank with, because you're going to have to give a blood sample before you log in. But like, getting back to the Web3, like, I don't know, like, there's really good and really bad. So like some of the things that I'm really troubled with about the Web3 scene right now is like there's some really, really toxic like tech bro type things. And like, you know, I have yet to see a legit and like what I would consider a usable case for NFTs.
Oh my God, yes.
Now, I want to be clear. I am not anti-cryptocurrencies.
Right.
I think cryptocurrencies are a legitimate thing. I think blockchain is a valid thing. I think that where I start diverging from a lot of the Web3 folks is one of the things that I always challenge people is when you say like, oh, blockchain, yay.
Right.
Can you swap blockchain with a access list or some sort of trusted list? And if you can just swap it with like that, blockchain, you don't need blockchain. Like a lot of times people are like, oh, it's the blockchain. And like they don't know, like it's like the secret voodoo sauce. I do think that like some smart contract stuff can be very, very interesting. Yeah. And I don't know if you caught it, but like I was like, when you were talking about the insider threat, because I don't know, like that is absolutely absent from every single threat matrix I've ever seen in this. The only thing that I've ever seen that kind of talks about it is if like what happens if somebody like just kind of goes crazy or like they lose their mind or whatever. Like the system should in theory self-correct where you say like, hey, the reputation of this person tanked. But I do worry about that transition because there's going to be like, it won't be a gentle one. Right. And I also worry about Web3 because when somebody has that like fall from grace, I don't know how the systems would allow them to like recover. Like what if, like, here's a scenario. What if you have like a family member or close friend die and you're just like in a dark place and you're doing real like, I'm angry and acting out wrong. Right. Like the system will shut them out, but how do you get back in? Like it's there's a lot of, I don't know, like I'm hopeful. I'll also tell you, I am worried as all hell. So I'm trying to not be like too Debbie Downer here, but one of the things that I do worry about, like cryptocurrencies and all the processing that we're doing, we're really burning up energy that we don't need to be burning up.
Oh yeah, for sure.
And we've got to come up with better ways of doing what we're doing. I think that the worry that I have is like we're setting up like really perverse economic incentives for you to just be like, yeah, I'm going to shovel puppies into this furnace because they burn the best, you know, like, let's go cryptocurrency choo-choo. And there needs to be some way of making it so that the system, like in a normal government, there's like accountability, and as broken as government is, at least they have to stand and face the voters a little bit. Like this system we're building, I worry that there's no accountability.
Yeah, well, I would, if I was going to dump money into something right now at this moment, I think it would be cryptocurrency. Just because the actions that we took against Russia, disconnecting them from SWIFT, they're going to start pushing cryptocurrency in Russia, guaranteed. Like they have no other way to kind of resuscitate their economy, I think. And when we do sanctions, what is the first thing that happens when we put a sanction on a country financially? They go off and grab Bitcoin. North Korea does it. China does it. But you raised a good point about the amount of energy it takes in order to make that run. And I think that if we're going to continue with cryptocurrency as a possibility of some sort of mainstream financial, system, they have to make it mineable for everybody, right? So unless you have a data center, a cold storage data center where you're like cranking through the kilowatts per hour, you can't mine shit. Like, I mean, there's just no way. I've seen people with a separate electric line go into the house in order just to mine Bitcoin. And to me, it's a financial system that we should all participate in if we're going to do it at all. But they need to make it available for everybody.
I think that I loved El Salvador's using of the volcanic energy.
Oh yeah.
I mean, it was like something like, but at the same time, like that turned green energy. But like my other question for the future of Web3 is like, once quantum computing truly gets to where it's accessible to everyone, like what does that do with all of that? Like, will that completely change absolutely everything once again? I mean, will it?
It's on who gets it first.
Yeah, because if the good guys get it, like, we'll be okay. But if the bad guys get it, don't worry about Web3. Don't worry about Web3. What's going to happen is overnight, the current internet is busted.
Yeah.
And I always tell like my students, my clients, and anybody, like, hey, when quantum drops, like if the bad guys get it, I'm going to be off sailing, or I'm out in the woods somewhere. And they're like, ha ha ha. And I'm like,
no, for real.
I am for real right now. And then they're like, really? And I'm like, it is game the hell over.
Yep.
It is the table. Like, that is the thing that keeps me up at night when I'm thinking internet is quantum.
Quantum bugs me. True AI bugs me. And I think because we're not there, and we will never be there unless we understand true consciousness and how decisions are actually made. But we're so far away from that. I think, probably within the next 5 years, we may be a little bit closer to what AI should be. But I think right now, machine learning is probably the best that we have, advanced machine learning. But another, my pet peeve, and what doesn't keep me up at night, but makes me want to kick somebody's teeth in, is metaverse and the idea of having that virtual existence in another world where you could buy a Gucci handbag, but it's just like, an in-game purchase. And it's like $2,000, just like the regular version. And what I was doing an interview for a documentary last week, and they asked me about gaming and in-gaming purchases, rare items, and all this stuff. And I thought, kids base their value on what they have in that game. When they lose that character, it gets taken from them, it kills them. Like, it literally depresses them, and they can't function in the real world. Can you imagine how many people, adults, would be that way in metaverse if the same thing happened? Because you're going to have Kardashians on there with, Lamborghinis and all these handbags and all this stuff. And normal people are going to want that same shit. So it's just, I think it's toying with the human psychology and making value seem something that it's not, right? So the inability to decipher personal value from in-game value and relying your confidence and your existence in the physical world based on what you have in the virtual world, I think is a poison. We start out with the kids doing that, and we fed it to the kids. Now we got Meta and that clan thinking that, hey, this is great, we should do it for adults too. And I think we're going to see a shitload of problems off the metaverse.
Well, I think I agree with you but at the same time, I think that's also what, our parents thought when the internet came out. Like, all of a sudden we're in this virtual reality, but we actually are seeing the downsides now of what the internet can do. Like, it can cause children to, go kill themselves because or lose all of their money, or let, the parents, bank accounts get drained because they went and bought something they weren't supposed to, or get kidnapped, or child, so many things have gone wrong with it. I mean, there's no safe way, but we've got to, part of it is, where's that social responsibility of hey, we have to teach a child that the most important thing is your own self, mentally, physically here. This is how you survive. And then once you understand that boundary, right? Like, this is fake. And yes, there can be money made, and there are all these things, and it's wonderful. at the same time, like, how do we teach that child? Like, you have to go research, right? Like going back to like, different sources. There was actually, and this has been a while, but at Burma, Facebook was automatically came with government sponsored phones. And so people in Burma thought that Facebook was the internet. They didn't know, like they're just handed technology for free. And
we did that though. We did that with Obama phones, right?
Well, we've been doing it forever. Like, I mean, I knew like my scariest moment. I'm in Panama going on a boat tour, and these shacks are like falling down, like no wall, maybe part of a roof. But you know what? They had a Claro TV on top, a dish, state-sponsored Claro dish. That's because marketing has taken over, and they're not teaching marketing. Marketing is getting a little bit better because they've gotten backlash. Kind of same thing back with the smoking and the cigarettes back in movies, and then we went away from it. You can't show smoking in movies anymore because then kids get this like false sense. Marketing is ruling these things, right? Like, make more money. You've got to be online. You got to be a YouTuber. You got to have all these subscribers. You got to do this. If you don't, you're not worth anything to us in the world, right? And it's okay. We want people like that. We need people like that. But we also like, where's that social responsibility going back to the whole parents thing? Like, we've got to teach. This is what real life is. You may not get that job, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I'll tell you. So the metaverse thing, like, I'm of two minds, okay? And it's really conflicting. I still am trying to resolve this. So, like, on one hand, I kind of am like, good luck meta, because, like, if it were so compelling, I would have expected Second Life to have gone better than it did, right? But on the flip, I live in Columbus, Ohio. And like recently, my wife and I have got very much into sailing. Like last November, we had this amazing vacation and it was awesome. And she's like, honey, we need to get licensed so we can go charter boats. We live in Columbus, Ohio. There's not much sailing there. So one of the things that we did, in addition to all the like study guides and stuff that we did, I bought an Oculus, Oculus Quest. And there's a virtual sailing game, and it is bonkers cool how like they're like, okay, now grab the halyard and hoist it up this way, and like I'm learning all these terms, and I'm like grinding the winch and all this stuff, and like it's like I'm getting to do something that I like realistically couldn't do in the real world. Right, I can't sail a 40-foot.
Down the Wabash.
Yeah, like I just can't do that. That's not a thing. And so like I don't know, like there's some potentials. I gotta say though, by and large, a lot of the stuff that I've been seeing is like straight up stupid. Right. Like there's this one VR shopping app where you're literally like you and your avatar are pushing a shopping cart, and then you grab the virtual object and drop it into the virtual shopping cart. Who, with a brain in their heads, like, what's not good is being able to go click, click, click. Instead, I'd really like it to recreate the most annoying thing you have to do in the week.
Right.
So I was on the App Store, and it was like one of the pop-up, like top 10, downloaded something. And one of it was like Life Organizer. And like, I love organizing things. So like for me, but I mean, I would never want an app to do it. But at the same time, I'm like, is this a thing? Could I have built this? I could have built this, and I could have. It's kind of like the fart app, right? Like, wait, hold on. The 99-cent app would have gone haywire, but but at the same time, is it teaching a kid how to shop for the first time, right? Like, is it teaching? Like, who is it for? Who's the aim? I mean, I think I agree with you 100%.
So the key here is who is behind ad, who is actually dealing with the ad. So all three of us, I think we're all in agreement that we would take the experience of metaverse and use it for a positive thing, right? But that's a very small percentage of the shitbags that live in the world. So what we see online is a direct resonance from what the world is like right now. It's just shit. Let's just face it. You got COVID, you got wars, you got corruption in government, you got people storming the White House, the Capitol, and that shit bleeds into the internet. Because those same people that are wearing, the bison horns and running through the Capitol building, they're online as well. And so that's what we're seeing. And the reason why I say that metaverse scares the shit out of me is because those idiots are going to be in metaverse. And what could be a good experience, or what could be a positive experience, is going to be ruled by the mass, by the numbers. And I hate to say it, but the numbers in the U.S. don't really reflect a lot of responsible people and outstanding citizens. So you're going to get that same chaos, that same real life, physical, just bag of shit onto the internet. And that's what we're going to see in like metaverse.
For anyone who has not already seen it, that's watching this podcast, there is a movie called The Gamer. And this is one of the reasons, not just The Gamer, there's several. Even WALL-E kind of addresses lots of things that are happening right now where everybody is just stuck into a phase or a place. Things can go amazing. It can be used for good. It can be used for bad. But that's where I really believe an art is the first stage before the actual life happens, right?
Well,
so
that's the desensitization area. So they use art to desensitize you for what's coming up next. And art imitates.
They're trying to show you hey, this could happen. But at the same time, you are right. A lot of times it just desensitizes us of the fact that hey, by the way, okay, I'll be fat and drinking a Slurpee in a rolly chair and outer space, and it's fine, whatever.
So what are your thoughts on that, Nick, when it comes to life and bleeding into the internet? Because I think a lot of the problems we see on the internet is not only because the internet sped up that connection to where I can talk to somebody across the world in 2 seconds, but it's also what type of person is behind that and what experience they're having in life and bringing it to the internet.
So, I think that the thing that I try to keep in mind is so the internet kind of collapses humanity into exactly the situation where we can chat with one another and just exchange ideas all day, every day. I do worry that it used to be that you would have that crazy drunk uncle, you're like, oh, that's Drunkle Bill doing his crazy stuff. And you could kind of write him off. But now the internet makes it easy for all of these folks
have a platform
to you're one of my kind. And, they get this critical mass together. And, and so I think that extremism on all of its types is a serious problem. And that there needs to be some way of, for quote unquote normal people that are willing to have conversations, that you can have hey, here's how we respect people that we violently disagree with, but we can come to middle ground. But there's also some people that were nah, you're out of the pool. Because if somebody's well, my opinion is I got to kill McDouglas. Hey, I'm not going to be able to talk you down from that. You need to get away.
Right.
And I think that some people are too hippy dippy on everybody's thoughts are important. No,
they're not.
Some people's aren't. And then other thing is, I think that some people take that side too much and they're well, if you don't roll up your sleeves just so
you're not cool,
a bad person and I got to kill you. That's what Mick said. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is we've got to have some kind of you got to be this high to ride the ride in terms of civility. And if you don't cross that barrier, you get to go, we should have this crazy net where you can just go bonkers.
Yeah.
And then there should be a more genteel kind of but I don't know, how do you make that threshold and not be crazy?
And that can vary. The crazy thing is worldwide, you're talking about that can vary from community to community.
Oh yeah.
State to state. I mean, we're talking about we've done this for the entire internet worldwide, right? So like, how do you find that middle ground, right? And that's kind of where this extremism, it's either, oh, well, you can have everything and be as mean as you want on this side. And then you have the other people who are like, but no, you can't even say a cuss word. Well, a cuss word could be like, I don't know, something,
darn,
like just something stupid. I know.
Darn.
Yeah, exactly. So how do you find that middle? It's really hard.
Follow me. I'll create the middle ground. Then we'll all
that's
be in
a
trouble.
great idea.
Right? No. So we are at the end of the hour, and Mick, I gotta say, man, I've been trying to hook up with you to do this podcast for months, man. And
our
it's
schedules
awesome.
are both
Crazy. Yeah, but I'll tell you what, man, it's been awesome talking to you. We need to keep in touch, man.
Hell yeah. I would love to do another one of these, or just shoot the shit, just like hanging with you. But yeah, I would have me on again. I would love it. This was a blast. I love it.
I'm glad to finally got you on here, like meet you in person. I know you're so busy, and thank you, by the way. I want to say thank you because one, I know that you work with SANS and you've got your own thing going, but the fact that you are doing internships and mentoring people, like that's what we really need. I know we all talk about certs, they serve a purpose, but truly having people that mentor and give internships based off of who people are and not what they have on a piece of paper. I just want to say thank you. That's really awesome. So
yeah, Mick's a great dude. He was my voice of reason when I was working at Bank of America's. Back then, back then I wasn't exactly cool-headed and I wasn't that mature. So, but
well, it cuts both ways though. There were a couple times where I was like, "Yo, like this is pretty jacked up," and you would be like, "Well, this." So don't. Nah, I'm not gonna let you say like that you were totally punk. And although when the thing was, when that bit got flipped on you, you'd be like, "Table flip."
True, very true. But I've grown up a little bit. Well, maybe not. But anyways,
I was like, don't brag too much.
But it was great having you on, Mick, and I definitely want to have you on again. And when I'm traveling through the speaking circuit this year, I'm going to see if I can drop down in Ohio somewhere. I'll be in Pennsylvania at the end of this month again, Western Pennsylvania. So maybe we can connect somehow. But anyways, for the listeners, thanks for listening. Subscribe. There's not a banner here for YouTube, but subscribe to YouTube, and look for 2 podcasts. This one and the previous one will be released next week. And it'll be on Techstrong T. Thank you, Techstrong, for replaying the broadcast. And that's it. I'll see you guys next week. Thanks, Mick.
Bye, guys. Bye, everybody.
CISO Talk. To hear how real-world CISOs are dealing with today's real-world issues. From enabling secure remote workers to accelerating secure cloud adoption, defending against a pandemic of security attacks and beyond. CISO Talk covers the cyber topics you want to learn about. With your hosts, Unisys CISO Matt Newfield and Media Ops CEO Alan Schimmel, featuring a revolving panel of CISO cyber experts. This is where CISOs talk. Join us on digitalanarchist.com and techstrong.tv.
Hey everybody, happy Monday. This is Charlene O'Hanlon, and I'm here now with the headlines. First up on DevOps.com is an article about understanding SaaS security for DevOps. Over the past few years, SaaS applications based in the cloud have exploded, with the market growing 18% each year. And it's estimated that 99% of organizations will be using one or more SaaS applications by the end of this year. What does this mean for security, especially for the security of personally identifiable information and business data in the enterprise? SaaS data includes, but is not limited to, customer-sensitive PII and payment information. Increasingly, SaaS applications also house mission-critical enterprise information, including product plans, patent information, business and operational processes, and human resources records. General purpose application security testing solutions aren't built for SaaS software environments and often slow down DevOps processes as well as lack the necessary visibility into SaaS environments. Instead, the patchwork of tools must be replaced with a CI/CD approach. This article outlines the impact of SaaS applications on enterprise security and offers the steps to take to ensure the security of SaaS apps. Good stuff. All right, we also look at privilege escalation vulnerability in GitHub repositories that was discovered by Legit Security. I love the name of that company, Legit Security, and has since been remediated. Researchers reported they found hundreds of GitHub instances rated with more than 1,000 stars each that could be subject to the vulnerability. The company also reached out directly to most of these affected sites, including an instance of GitHub that is used to develop the open source Nginx web server, which is employed across hundreds of millions of websites. Cybercriminals could exploit a vulnerable build script to modify code or built artifacts that would result in software being shipped with code controlled by some other entity. The vulnerability could also enable access to sensitive secrets, such as keys, that are used to access cloud services or simply create a malicious pull request. Legit security researchers discovered the vulnerability by employing a set of risk assessment tools that are part of its software as a service platform, which enables them to apply security policies across the entire software development lifecycle. Excuse me. In news, ExcelQ unveiled the cloud-based ExcelQ Live test automation platform, which is continuously integrated with a wide range of low-code and no-code application development and deployment platforms, with a goal of making it easier to run complex tests across a multi-cloud computing environment. The ExcelQ Live platform reduces testing complexity by automatically updating itself as platforms from Salesforce, ServiceNow, and other companies are updated. It also provides access to pre-built codeless automation assets that are modeled on business processes via a live link. The company is also moving toward creating a marketplace where software vendors and service providers can build and deploy pre-built testing assets as well. Gartner predicts the adoption of low-code and no-code technologies will nearly triple by 2025, and keeping up with the testing amid the influx of applications will be a major challenge. Embracing test automation platforms infused with artificial intelligence capabilities will be a critical way for organizations to keep up. All right, over on Container Journal, we list 7 CNCF tools for scheduling and orchestration. Container managers like Kubernetes have become critical to managing large numbers of containers. By running containers in a cluster, a system can optimize how each application consumes memory. Automating these container management operations has become essential as the cloud-native ecosystem moves toward microservices designs and increasingly distributed computing. Kubernetes has become the near-standard container orchestration and scheduling utility, enabling engineers to better manage their distributed nodes from one control plane. Nowadays, it is the most actively maintained orchestrator, which means much of the other tooling in this area tends to integrate with Kubernetes and extend it into unique development scenarios. The Cloud Native Computing Foundation has been a force for new cloud-native tools in areas like streaming, observability, container runtime, CI/CD, and others. This article examines 7 projects related to scheduling and orchestration that are hosted by the CNCF. Many of these open source projects are Kubernetes aware and help deal with concerns such as multi-cluster management, multi-cloud, data-intensive workloads, and other specific requirements. And we have the latest from Loft Labs, which has added an isolation capability to its open source virtual cluster software that enables multiple application workloads to more easily share the same Kubernetes cluster. This addition to vCluster reduces the time and effort required to isolate workloads running within a multi-tenant Kubernetes environment, as each virtual cluster can now be configured to have its own separate control plane to ensure isolation. Previously, any Kubernetes security mechanisms for vCluster workloads had to be created manually by cluster administrators. Now, a variety of Kubernetes security controls can be configured automatically without the need for manual configuration, including admission control policies, resource quotas and limit ranges, and network policies. The isolation mode enforces a set of baseline policies. However, administrators can further harden virtual clusters via their own custom policies. That capability will make it easier for IT teams to enforce zero-trust IT policies across a multi-tenant Kubernetes cluster. On Security Boulevard, we take a look at attorney-client privilege and email privacy. A recent case involving the former President of the United States and his attorney illustrates the possible harm that can occur when you communicate with your lawyer using anything other than a personal email address. On March 28th of this year, California Federal District Court Judge David O. Carter ruled that Donald Trump's election lawyer, John Eastman, did not waive the attorney-client and work product protections that would have applied to his communications simply by using an email account at Chapman University's Fowler School of Law, where Eastman worked, due to the specific language in the law school's privacy policy. However, Judge Carter's ruling found that the information was not privileged on other grounds. Putting aside the ultimate question of the privilege that should be afforded discussions surrounding the most recent presidential election and the January 6th storming of the U.S. Capitol building last year, the case raises an important issue for anyone who decides to email their lawyer using their employer's email account, and the importance of companies drafting data and email privacy policies that appropriately protect, or alternatively don't protect, the privilege in such communications. This article lays out what organizations need to know and includes references to other cases that illuminate the uneven landscape that is attorney-client privilege. And finally, we have information on a server-side request forgery flaw in an API used by an undisclosed U.S.-based financial services firm that serves hundreds of banks and millions of customers, which was discovered by Salt Security researchers. The flaw allowed administrative account takeover that could enable a cybercriminal to gain access to financial transactions and personal data, and allow attackers to transfer funds. Specifically, researchers could easily manipulate a number of these external interactions that required input values such as URL values. That issue has since been remediated, but the design pattern for the API that led to the flaw being created is commonly used by many other organizations. In many cases, organizations are not aware of potential API security issues. Developers should pay particular attention to user-controlled input values, adding validation and behavioral detection to protect data from SSRF attacks. All right, that's it for the headlines today. Please check back with me tomorrow when I will have a new batch. Until then, I hope everybody has a great day, and please, whatever you do, stay safe.
This is Digital Anarchist.
Hey, everybody. Welcome back to Techstrong TV. I am Charlene O'Hanlon, and I am here now with Donald Fisher, who is the CEO and co-founder of Tidelift. Donald, thank you so much for taking a few minutes and talking with me today. Do appreciate it.
Great to be here. Thanks for the opportunity, Charlene.
Great. So I want to talk to you a little bit about open source software and the security thereof, but I wonder if you can start us off by telling us a little bit about Tidelift.
Yeah, absolutely. Happy to tell you about Tidelift and then get into some of these important issues. So Tidelift, we're a relatively young startup. We're focused on helping application development teams who are building with open source software as the ingredients of their applications to be able to move fast, build those applications while also staying safe making sure that their packages that they're using meet certain security standards, et cetera. The way that we do that is fairly unique. So it's a combination of both software. We have this purpose-built SaaS tool that helps organizations keep track of and apply rules to the software, their so-called software supply chain, at least their open source software supply chain. And the really unique part is that we do this in partnership with independent open source maintainers, typically the original creators, or at least the current maintainers of those open source projects, across now thousands of widely used open source components. So a software plus people solution to this increasingly important problem.
Yeah, well, you guys are perfect. You are the perfect person then to talk to about this issue, and it really is an issue in application development these days. We have heard so many things about the state of open source software and the security of the open source software. Log4j, I guess, is kind of the latest to make the headlines. The vulnerability there that affected so many organizations, especially those, I guess, who are using Java or JavaScript. But this is just the latest in other things that we've been hearing about with respect to open source security. So I have a feeling that a lot of people who were really kind of gung ho about using open source code and open source software in the past are maybe feeling a little gun shy these days when it comes to using it. So what are you guys seeing in the space?
Yeah, I think it's definitely, there's a heightened awareness around the issues of ensuring your open source software supply chain broadly. The reality is these days, it's actually not really possible to build modern applications without using open source. So it's not even really an option anymore. Time was that people would say, should we use the commercial app server or, one of these emerging open source software development stacks? It's not even really a question anymore. I mean, you can't build a modern website or a modern mobile application without using open source components, essentially. So the question is really, how are you going to use them? What kind of a process and approach are you going to put into place to make sure that you can use the stuff that you need to use while also ensuring that you're verifying that it meets these standards? And yeah, I agree that this incident that occurred around the Apache Log4j package has really put this in the forefront and actually moved it way up the priority list for many organizations and CIOs and CISOs, this issue of software supply chain security. And the reason why it had such an impact is that this package that had the vulnerability in question is a great package. It's widely, as you said, it's used in almost every enterprise Java application that there is. We found it in 100% of our customers were using this open source package because it's one of the best open source packages there is. 20-year history on Apache Log4j. That said, it's still software, and software is going to have issues. There's going to be new, security vulnerabilities that are discovered that are, sometimes accidentally introduced. And so the question is, how are we going to have a set of processes and frameworks and, also the people element to respond to those things, and as much as possible to be a little bit more proactive and try to get ahead of some of these things? That's where TideLift and a lot of other folks in the industry are looking to advance the state of the art.
Yeah, well, it kind of begs the question, are we doing enough with respect to testing applications and testing software beforehand, or testing the code at least, so that we don't have as many vulnerabilities in the wild as we do? And along with that, are there instances where, the code goes out and everything is hunky dory, and then technology kind of moves at such a rapid pace that vulnerabilities just kind of happen because there are changes and things advance, and all of a sudden what once was not a vulnerability at one point all of a sudden becomes a vulnerability.
That can definitely happen. And I mean, the Apache Log for Shell incident, that's the sort of name that was given to this vulnerability in Apache Log4j. It actually it's sort of a context dependent vulnerability. It's actually the reason why there's a vulnerability there is there's sort of a feature of the package that is used by some organizations that happens to leave an opening for attackers in certain configurations. So I think you're right that the landscape is constantly shifting and so on. And so how can we contend with it? I think that history demonstrates that there's multiple layers of defense here, as in so many things. There are some things that we can do proactively ahead of time just to make sure that secure practices are being used to develop software, whether that's using tools to look at the code and sort of audit the code for common issues, but also issues around just like the configuration of systems on the development side, right? Like, is two-factor authentication enabled on all of the relevant systems to avoid somebody sneaking in and corrupting a package. And then, recognizing that some things are going to, slip through even the best, proactive measures. We also have to be well equipped to respond when these issues emerge. And so, one of the emerging industry requirements is to have a comprehensive list of the ingredients that are going into every application that you build, the so-called software bill of materials, or SBOM. And what that does is it allows you to know, when something comes up in the future, quickly identify all the places in your enterprise that are impacted. And so, there's multiple layers of defense here. We do have to recognize software is going to have defects. We can do some things proactively to try to reduce the occurrence and head off as many as possible, but we also need to be able to respond when they do arise and quickly patch and remediate.
So do you think we've gotten better at making sure that the code is as free of vulnerabilities as it can be, as we've obviously the entire industry is paying attention now to these open source security vulnerabilities. So do you think that heightened awareness has actually been a good thing for application development and securing that open source code beforehand, before it goes out into into the masses, if you will?
Yeah, well, I think in general, I would observe that open source the median open source software package is more secure than it ever has been, because there's more eyeballs on it. There are these increased standards and incentivization mechanisms like Tidelift to encourage open source maintainers to vet that their packages meet certain standards, including security standards. But on the other hand, just the problem has gotten so much more vast because organizations are consuming so much more open source in their application development because it's so good, right? And because it's so necessary to build applications. So, it's not like the security of the average software project is declining. It's actually getting better, but there's just so much more software flowing in. And then at some point, there's a kind of meta problem in organizations that are building with open source software, which is just keeping track of all of the moving parts. What even are we using right now? And how do we know when we need to respond to an incident that arises? What's a nice to have? What's an urgent vulnerability that needs to be remediated immediately? And then how? How do we know what to do? Those are the opportunities, I think, in the market space right now.
So we talk a lot about DevSecOps, especially on DevOps.com, and the need for organizations to shift their security mindset and practices further left in the application development lifecycle. Do you think that that's having an impact? And do you think that more organizations would actually benefit from such practices? Because I feel like there's still a disconnect between what people are saying and what people are actually doing. Like, DevSecOps is awesome, but for whatever reason, they're not really practicing it, or at least practicing it at the level that it really should be.
Yeah, we see organizations that we're working with, DevSecOps is a pretty broad concept, right? There's a lot of different elements going into it. So, part of it is having a standardized tool chain and, different products and practices around that. But I think each stage of that pipeline is important. And to your point around shifting left, when it comes to open source software supply chain security, we think one of the best approaches, and increasingly, I think a generally acknowledged best practice around open source software, is to try to create a pre-vetted catalog of open source components that are essentially somebody's looked at and ensured they meet these standards as a starting point. It's actually, I sometimes think of this as shifting left of the entire software development process to just having some building blocks that have been verified that you can pick up and use to put into your process, right? It's like shifting left of the whole thing. And I think one of the challenges, that is that organizations historically have taken a approach that's more kind of midstream in that software release process, where they, there's all these great tools that will go and try to inspect your open source software kind of midstream as you're incorporating to your applications. But it tends to give you sometimes ambiguous guidance in terms of what actions you actually need to take. And frankly, putting those tools into the DevSecOps process means that your DevSecOps team needs to be operators of those tools and experts in, discerning all of the, nuances of those. One of the opportunities that we see is to basically do all of this work ahead of time for at least the commonly used universe of open source application dependencies, packages like Apache Log4j and many others like it that go into applications. Essentially get that work off of the plate of your DevSecOps team's desk, shift it left of your actual team as much as possible.
Oh, that's an interesting concept. I wonder if we could shift things so far left that it actually kind of falls right off the edge.
It's like shifting it out of frame or something.
Right. Well, that'll be interesting to see whether organizations will maybe look to that approach to help secure their open source code. I think we are going to end up with a number of different ways to approach this very pervasive problem. I think they're all going to be innovative, and I think they're all going to be helpful. But I think the important thing that organizations need to recognize is the fact that they need to do something.
Yeah, I agree. And then, the other part that I think oftentimes organizations have not appreciated is that this software is coming from somewhere. It's in fact not coming from a traditional vendor. Which folks sort of expect naturally that, I'm using this software commercially or in a professional context, it must be coming from a professional organization. So often, especially for this universe of application components, it's coming from individuals doing it for other reasons, other great reasons, like they like to have a impact. They like to see their creative work used, at scale across the internet. But we have to sort of appreciate that there are humans behind this and find ways that we can align with and partner, and by the way, thank and respect those creators who have made all of this possible for commercial organizations and non-commercial users alike. And that, I think, is really important for folks to keep high on their priority list. How can we support and thank and align those with those open source maintainers rather than just coming up with more work for them to do on our behalf for free?
Right. Good point. Well, I'm a big fan of cake as a way to thank people. So, maybe cupcakes for everyone. I don't know. What do you think, Dave? I think
or money. If we're asking them to do something that's commercially valuable,
they want to be paid now. Okay. All right. Well, I do agree with you. I do believe that they really should be rewarded for their efforts. It's and frankly, sometimes money talks, right? If you pay somebody, perhaps they're going to be a little more vigilant about, the cleanliness of the code that gets put out there. But that is a whole other conversation for a whole other time, I'm sure, Donald. Thank you so much for having this conversation with me about open source software and cybersecurity. And I'm sure that this is a conversation that we're going to continue in the future. So keep your calendar open, I guess.
I'd be delighted to come back and take it to the next level. Thanks so much.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. I do appreciate your time and your expertise. All right, everybody, please stick around. We've got lots more Techstrong TV coming up, so stay tuned.
Looking for a live conference focused on the tools, technologies, and practices most important to your business? Innotech conferences are live one-day business and technology conferences highlighting the latest in trends for IT leaders, developers, and IT professionals. Each event combines education, innovation, peer-to-peer networking, and the latest technology and business solutions for a diverse IT-focused audience. Inotech conferences occur throughout the year in strategic regional locations, bringing together technology professionals from various industries to learn about the solutions, practices, and tools impacting their day-to-day work and gain insight into what's to come. Presenters at Inotech conferences are selected and curated to ensure each session provides the most up-to-date and relevant information without any hype. Whether you're interested in digital transformation, cybersecurity, cloud, IT leadership, or DevOps, Inotech conferences deliver. 2022 events are scheduled to be held in Austin, Dallas, Oklahoma City, Houston, and Washington, D.C. Inotech conferences are produced by Techstrong Live and powered by Techstrong Group.
Hey everybody, happy Monday. This is Charlene O'Hanlon and I'm here now with a webinars preview. I always tell you, we have so many great webinars coming up on DevOps.com, Container Journal, and Security Boulevard. Well, I got 3 winners here for you, so I hope you can mark your calendar and join us. The first one is called Getting Started with Reliability Management. This one is happening tomorrow, that's Tuesday, April 12th at 11 a.m. Eastern on DevOps.com. This is sponsored by Sumo Logic, partnered with AWS. Now, keeping modern, complex, and continuously changing applications running is not easy. Most IT organizations operate from one fire drill by going from one fire drill to the next. Reliability management can help shift teams from a reactive to a proactive stance to provide a fantastic digital experience and mitigate service disruptions. So this webinar will cover how service level agreements and error budgets align your organization, how to get started with reliability management, and organizational best practices and patterns that aid success. The second webinar is called GitHub Actions and Code Injection, Avoiding Vulnerable Configurations. This one is happening Wednesday, April 13th at 1 p.m. Eastern on Security Boulevard. This one is sponsored by Cycode. GitHub Actions is an increasingly popular DevOps tool because of its rich marketplace and ease of use. As part of Cycode's research into the GitHub Actions security landscape, it discovered several pitfalls in the workflow that could result in severe security consequences. Unless developers deeply understand GitHub best practices, the workflows are likely to have mistakes that are costly and could create a supply chain risk to the application. In this webinar, they'll discuss how Cycode found and disclosed vulnerable workflows in several popular open source tools, as well as delve into GitHub Actions architecture to understand the possible consequences of these vulnerabilities and present some possible mitigations for these issues. That's going to be a really good one there. All right, the last webinar is called The Road to Reliability. This one is happening Thursday, April 14th at 1 p.m. Eastern on DevOps.com. This one is sponsored by Gremlin. Now, over the years, a lot of research has been conducted and many books have been written on improving the resilience of software. This talk will dive deep into 3 key practices identified by Gene Kim, Jez Humble, and Nicole Forsgren, who are the authors of Accelerate, the Science of Lean Software and DevOps. In this webinar, they will discuss the key measures of tempo and stability and how practicing chaos engineering will increase both. Interesting stuff. This webinar will offer up information on why teams should focus on the customer experience, how to test for failures, and practical tips for resource consumption, capacity planning, region failover, decoupling services, and deployment pain. Wow. Okay. All right. That's a great webinar as well. And those are all the webinars that I have for today's preview. I'll be back tomorrow and I will have a fresh new batch for you. Until then, I hope everybody has a great day. And please, whatever you do, stay safe. All right, we are back Last up on today's Techstrong TV broadcast, we have our Something Old segment. This is from the recent Predict 2022 virtual conference that we held a couple months ago, actually. This is a conversation between Tracy Bannon, who is the DevOps advocate over at MITRE and my co-host over at Techstrong Women, and Chris Hughes, who's the co-founder and CISO over at Acquia. And they have a conversation on the topic of Tug-O-War 2022, digital transformation and cyber resiliency. Certainly a very relevant topic for every organization today as we talk about aligning business agility and technical agility and cyber resiliency as the cornerstone for all aspects of software design and delivery. Great stuff there. It's a great topic and certainly a great conversation. So let's roll it now.
Hey, Chris, this is Tracy Bannon. I'm glad you had some time to talk with me today here, doing a little bit of predicting on what's going on in the future. Chris, why don't you introduce yourself and then I'll talk a little bit about me and we can start to spar on this topic.
Yeah, definitely. My name is Chris Hughes, currently the CISO and co-founder at a company named Acquia, focusing on cybersecurity in the public sector. But I have almost 20 years of experience, going across active duty military, government civil service with Navy and GSA and other organizations, and on the industry side as well. Super active in the community around cloud security and DevOps and all things that nature, basically.
And that's what makes it such a great compliment when you and I get together. So I'm Trace Bannon. I'm an architect and engineer, and I spend a lot of time helping people with digital transformation, especially when they're starting out with DevSecOps. Obviously, you heard the sec part there, and that's where Chris and I have a lot of overlaps in talking about how security and digital transformation need to come together. We named this topic today as a tug of war that we see on the horizon. This is about predicting what's going to happen. Chris, you and I had chatted a little bit about the fact that digital transformation is, I will call it the next evolution of DevSecOps. And business is just now really getting aligned with technology in terms of agility. And they're moving down this pathway and they seem to be doing pretty well. What's happening on the cyber side with all of these whack-a-mole pop-up media events going on? What's really happening in the cyber world right now?
I definitely think it's interesting because, prior to a lot of some of these high profile events, there was a lot of talk about how cybersecurity needs to enable the business, not be in the office of no, needs to align with the business objectives and key outcomes and things like that. And then you have some high profile incidents, like Log4j and SolarWinds and such occur. And security, kind of immediately jumps in and kind of goes to what they know best, which is trying to remediate and stop these things and stop the bleeding, which obviously, can have business disruption or, sometimes business intervention, for example, and delay. So I think there's a tug of war in that sense that, cybersecurity is trying to align with the business and help them go through that digital transformation process and also innovate on the security side as well, to be honest. But also, they need to ensure that they do things right and mitigate risk without disrupting the business. So it is definitely a tug of war.
That also seems to point out that our cyber pros are really dual-hatted. Right. While they need to enable the business, they're also protectors of the realm. so we can have them, they need to be innovating that in, they need to be coding that in, testing that in, guiding it in from the beginning. But when something happens, they are the first people that we go to say help. And so that tells me that we need more professionals in this area. We are already having a difficult time finding all the IT staff that we need. But what about the security pros? Are you finding it hard to hire, to train, just to staff in these areas?
So personally, I haven't had too much trouble yet, but luckily because I have a really strong network of folks, I've been in this space for quite a while. But I know overall many organizations are, and it's due to, kind of legacy ways of approaching, whether it's having strict requirements around geographical work, you can't remote work for a lot of organizations. You'll see remote until COVID, which we know that what does that mean exactly? And then also, there's things around, traditional educational backgrounds that are, baked into these job descriptions, or often, the job descriptions are being written by individuals who don't understand the technology. They'll say 8 years of technology X, and it's only been around for 3 years. So it's like, well, I'm not going to apply to that. I don't meet the requirement. But the thing is, many people would never, ever meet that requirement because it's impossible. So I think that's part of the problem, but also is, we need to open up the aperture when it comes to the career field from individuals for non-traditional educational backgrounds, web-based learning, Udemy, A Cloud Guru, you name it. There's so many different platforms to learn on nowadays. So we need to open up that candidate pool. And then even folks from non-traditional, backgrounds too, whether they come from legal or some other kind of background, there's definitely no shortage of high-profile CISOs, for example, that come from legal backgrounds or, all kinds of different creative backgrounds even, who are having a lot of success. And I think it's because they think differently than someone who may have been in security for a long time, and it helps them maybe communicate with the business better, have those soft skills, have some of the capabilities that maybe a traditional cybersecurity person may not have. So there's a lot that can be done to address that shortage, to be honest with you.
And I see that on my side of the fence, so to speak, although we actually live in the same world. We're both trying to get secure software into production to suit the business's needs. But it's educational diversity. We talk about all kinds of other diversity, and Chris, you've been a really passionate person in this area, as am I. But educational diversity has really come to the forefront for me recently. I will go back in my long ago history. There was probably the top-notch architect who could code. Right, he was an elevator architect. He could go from the boiler room to the C-suite. Was a fellow by the name of Martin, and he had a degree in urban planning. Great. He was a fantastic mind. He was logical. He saw the big picture, and he was able to learn and get that just in time. I would say he was a little bit before his time in being able to get JIT learning. He would go out and realize this was the next thing that was coming or was on the horizon. That's going to be an ongoing place where we're going to have to double down and focus, because we do need to have more folks in these fields. But you brought up that it's a different perspective. And oftentimes it's that other perspective that gives a little crack of light, right? You take a look, Chris says something to me, I think about it, I ponder about it. I never thought of it that way before. I need to go down a new path. I would have never thought about it had I not engaged with somebody who is highly diverse from me, with their education, with their experience. And now we're sharing a common problem that we're trying to solve. And at the end of the day, these job descriptions, especially for you and I, working a lot with the government space, is a place where we're going to have to help. Our friend Christina couldn't be here today, right? The COVID bug has the whole family down, but she deals so much with acquisition and with contracting. And one of the things that she's bringing up is that same thing. How do we change the job descriptions so that it's about the capabilities that you bring to the table? Sometimes you're going to need to know that somebody has a comp sci degree because they're doing some advanced algorithmic component, but it ain't everything. So getting more job descriptions that allow us to be more skills focused, I think is going to be a big part of that. Do you see, with business and technology trying to align? So we're over here doing this digital transformation, and we're barreling down that, and investments have been put in place, and there's a digital transformation champion, right, in the enterprise. Now we have a cyber champion in the enterprise. Do you see those as running parallel to each other? Do you see an intersection point? Do you see there being competition or tug of war between those two efforts within an enterprise?
I definitely do, but I think there's always going to be a natural tension to an extent between them, but there's also a lot of synergies. And I think the sooner we realize that some tension is healthy, right? That's what kind of that resistance is what causes growth, to be honest with you. And I don't think they're mutually exclusive. When it comes to digital transformation and organizations, like you mentioned in the beginning, are increasingly realizing how critical technology is to business, right? Now, we're living in a digital economy, as many would say now, and that involves technology, which of course needs to be secured. So I think cybersecurity can do a lot there to help you protect reputational brand, avoid regulatory and compliance ramifications. There's a lot that can be done from a security perspective to help you deliver value securely and meet those goals that are mutually for both those groups essentially.
Now, how do we? I forecast, right? We're talking about trends and things that we see on the horizon, predictions that we think are going to happen. I agree wholeheartedly with you that they can and should coexist. But in the back of my head, as I look at them as being somewhat separate camps, not intentionally divided from each other, but different imperatives kick them off. It almost reminds me of a marriage where there are two careers, and there's give and take that has to happen between those two different careers. Somebody's, the kids are sick, somebody's got to stay home. Somebody has to slow down a little bit so somebody else can speed up. It's not always both all speed ahead. Do you think that we're going to end up in a position where we have to maybe think about it in advance, negotiate in advance before the next cyber event happens, or before the business potentially gets upset because the feature's not coming out as quickly as they want?
Yeah, I love that dichotomy because there's so much truth to it. It really is an ebb and flow, right? At times the business and digital transformation may take the forefront, the front seat, and then you have something like a Log4j or some other notorious high-profile security incident occur, and cybersecurity needs to be at the forefront of that situation to get a handle on it. But this is also why it's important for security to be involved in these conversations, with the business early on, and then also for the organization, not just security, but the organization to be practicing business continuity, incident response, those kind of things, so that when something does happen, it's not a slam on the brakes, everything's got to stop. How do we deal with this? It could be like, well, we've practiced scenarios like this. We've got collaboration going. We know who needs to be involved, to what extent, and who's responsible for what. So that can go a long way if people would practice those kind of things in advance versus having the fire drill when the fire is underway. You know what I mean?
Oh, gotcha. I mean, we're talking about open communications and transparency. We're talking about acceptance. We're talking about reprioritizing rapidly, reprioritizing based on risk. Those all seem commonsensical. And yet, when I think about the developers, I advocate a lot on behalf of the developers. Maybe I should say the engineers on the delivery team. We're asking them to take on a lot. We're talking about moving everything to the left. Everything's got to go to the left. I get it. I agree. There's probably some fine tuning that everything needs to go in every direction. But if I'm advocating for the delivery team, they're under a lot of stress and strain. And another area where I predict we're going to have to focus in the coming year to 18 months is going to be to address cognitive load, especially around helping the delivery organization to understand security. What are secure coding standards? How do we help that to be part of their daily life, as opposed to we're still creeping backwards right now, but many of our security our developers and our engineers are not security pros yet, right? They're not seasoned pen testers. They don't know all of those features and aspects. We're going to have to help them with training and with tools, right, early in the game, as the Chris's of the world, as the Katies of the world help us with, bringing you into the design and bringing it into the innovation as far left as possible.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely critical. It's a combination of, you mentioned, like, maybe it's tooling that can help facilitate, shifting security left, CI/CD pipelines and SaaS and DAS and secret scanning and on, baking in those guardrails as we like to call them now, so that people can move fast but safely. And then also just helping them understand, the key fundamentals of security and helping them, try to prioritize that a bit. But, to be that said, there needs to be some empathy on the security side as well, understanding that the development teams, for example, are under these requirements and expectations from the business leadership to deliver on a certain schedule, for example. So it needs to be a give and take on both sides of that. I definitely think it's absolutely critical. And then, as much as we want to shift security left, and we all know it's cheaper to find vulnerabilities earlier in the life cycle. It costs less money, less resources, less disruption. There's still day two operations. There's still runtime, security operations that need to be accounted for. So you're not going to catch everything. I wish we could, right? But it's simply not going to work that way. So you need coverage, when you get to production environments still, because things will go awry. Whether it's something that's 0 day or something you couldn't have anticipated, you can't account for everything. From the shift left perspective per se.
And that's a pretty important part of it as folks talk about DevOps. They're so focused on dev. What about ops? And that's a huge part of it. As I mentioned before, new tools are going to need to come into play as we're looking at AI ops, or ML ops, whatever you want to call it, leveraging AI. Not to look at your end user data, not as a way to provide end user benefit, but to benefit developers and to benefit operations. cyber can benefit in this area as well, right? Like whether it's from SIEM tools or whether it's from some more advanced tooling. Is there something that you've been keeping your finger on the pulse of, that you've been really looking at over the coming year, that you think might be helpful to cyber pros?
Yeah, I definitely think there's a lot of promising developments in that area. We talked about the cybersecurity workforce shortage, right? For example, I don't know that it's something we'll ever entirely solve. That's why things such as automation, AI, machine learning, things like that are promising. If you look at some of the cloud native services that are coming into play around IDS, IPS, SIEM capabilities, as you mentioned, SIEM SOAR, those kind of things, it's helping address, those day-to-day operations, the production operational aspect of cybersecurity. That's where I think you can get a lot of benefit from those technologies, because everyone can't be everywhere at all times. We'll never be able to keep an eye on things to the extent that a computer can, to be honest with you, in many cases. So that's where I think we can get a lot of value when you look to AI and machine learning. I think we're seeing a lot of promising things out of, especially the hyperscale cloud providers, and some really promising, third-party vendors and such as well.
I see the same thing on the dev side of the house with some of the tools that are out there. I think one of them is Open Refractory. They are able to apply some machine learning so that there were some AI to predict where the issues are in the code. They are able to automatically fix the code. You can choose to accept them or not. So there's some neat things that are happening there. But I want to track back. It's been resonating in my mind. I've been hearing it again and again. One of the things you said is that we have to have empathy for the developers. I'd actually say that we have to have empathy for the cyber folks as well, because if we actually look at the numbers, and we look at it from a numbers perspective, cyber folk are way outnumbered in every situation, no matter what. I don't remember if it's 10 to 1, 1,000 to 1, but they're really, really, really outnumbered. So there's as many tools as we can give them is wonderful. But at the end of the day, I do think we have to remember that they are double-hatted. So there has to be empathy towards that double-hatting, because I may be over here to help you today, but when that new CVE comes out, when there's a new eruption, the first thing that we've got to do is say, okay, Chris, go fix. I got your back. I'm back here. We'll slow down the pipeline right now. We're gonna shut off the valve for a little while you help us and then we'll do what you need to get done.
Yeah, I love that. That's totally true. I mean, I forget the exact numbers too, but I've seen numbers like 500 to 1, and things like that. And it goes back to the, that traditional mindset of, cybersecurity being a cost center, for example, where dev is what's producing business value and driving, outcomes for customers or whatever the case is. So I think that's part of that dynamic. I've never worked anywhere in my career in cybersecurity where like, man, we have so many people, like we have more people than we need. It's never, ever been like that. So I think empathy all around would be super beneficial, especially, going back to what we talked about with COVID, and the remote work, and people are juggling, kids being home, parents and family members being ill. So I think all of us need to realize that we're all just people doing the best that we can in our various roles and responsibilities.
The remote aspect of it is both very enabling and very tiring as well, especially, Chris, I think you have like 4 or 400, right? You've got a house full of kids. And I know how mine are a little bit older, and I know how difficult it can be with those little ones there. It does add to the cognitive load. Another area that folks don't often talk about, and this probably needs to be spoken, is that there's a reason that there's a 40-hour work week, right? It does track back to the industrial age, but that's when mistakes start to happen. As we press people for faster, more secure, more value, 40 hours may not be enough for that one individual. But we start to make mistakes, and some of those mistakes are security mistakes. So I actually believe in my heart of hearts that I'm going to get better code quality if I'm not asking people to constantly surge. An occasional surge, yeah, I get it. But it should not be a day in and a day out. And that's hard right now as we're trying to help people to change their careers, as we're trying to staff more people with all of this. Again, then we start to think about AI and how AI can help us, how these other tools can help us on the horizon. So, Chris, I think we've been talking probably for about 20, 25 minutes now. I want to make sure that, are there any other messages? We wanted to give this, short and sweet predictions, Tracy and Chris, what do we think is going to happen? Tug of war between the two. Is there anything else that you really want to share with everybody?
Not necessarily that we haven't touched on already. I do like one thing you just mentioned about, the 40-hour work week and kind of like the cognitive load piece. I think one thing we're seeing in cloud native environments in particular is like the developers increasingly being responsible for more and more of the stack. And that can have a major cognitive load implication for them. And then, what you mentioned a second ago about the work week and the overload and stuff reminds me of a kind of a martial arts quote I've heard, because I do jujitsu, and it's like slow is smooth and smooth is fast, right? So if you're rushing all the time, you're going to make mistakes. If you slow down and focus on what you're doing, and you can actually work, coherently, I think that can make a big difference. On the prediction front, not to go too technical, but I definitely think we'll see things like supply chain, software supply chain be a critical topic. Adversaries are well aware that, they can impact one thing and have a cascading impact across, tens or hundreds of thousands of customers and organizations. But I think this has been a great conversation in a lot of different directions.
Thank you, Chris. To build on the bill of materials, there's a lot of amazing work that's happening by a lot of small firms, and I'm really happy about what's happening with that ecosystem of small vendors, new folks coming up with new ideas and really bringing them forward, especially around maintainers, maintenance of the software. Open source traditionally has been thought of as really great because it's quasi crowdsourced, right? If you have a good idea, you get in there and together we make it a lot better. But we haven't talked about what the responsibilities are after I make that code commit. And so I think we're going to see a lot of attention spent on figuring out who is the maintainer over time. Do you pay them? Do you subscribe to have that? How do we track back and understand the IP? And do we want to know the IP? Who's making the contribution? It gets pretty detailed pretty fast, but it is another one of those things that are on the horizon for us in the coming year.
Yeah, definitely. No doubt about it. I was going to throw out there, I know you're familiar with organizations like TideLift and others who are pursuing that kind of that crowdsource model, helping maintainers receive funding if they're, you have a critical dependency on someone in some obscure location, right? You need to account for that and maybe fund them so that you get the level of maintenance and security that you're looking for. So I definitely think those are all critical things that we'll see, talked about more and more in 2022 and beyond, to be honest.
So, Chris, thanks for agreeing to chat with me today. I really appreciate our time together. I always have such a blast when we just get together and talk. Hopefully, everybody who is listening to this recording has gains a lot from it as well. Please do feel free to reach out to Chris Hughes or myself. Our information, contact information, Tracy Bannon, Chris Hughes, will be posted along with this recording. Thank you.
All right, that wraps up today's Techstrong TV broadcast. Hope you enjoyed it. I enjoyed bringing it to you. I'm going to be back tomorrow with a brand new broadcast for you. But before we close out, just a quick reminder, we've got a lot of events coming up. I hope you can join us for some of them. We have both in-person and online events, virtual summits happening throughout the year in various locations around the country for the in-person events. So do check out our lineup on techstrongevents.com. You can see all of the things that we've got going on for you throughout the year, and check out the agendas, speaker lineups, and also register for the events. I hope to see you at one or two or more of the events throughout the year, because I'll be there as always. And regarding Techstrong TV broadcast, I'll be here too. So I have the ability to be in multiple places at once. No, it's always a good day at Techstrong TV. And we're going to have a great show for you tomorrow. We're finishing it up now as we speak, and it's going to be a good one. Hope you can join me for that. Until then, I hope everybody has a great day. Please, whatever you do, stay safe.